So we shall be looking something on collections and arrays. So these are the two things that we are going to get into it. So I'm going to first share this link because this is the official documentation of C#. And you could see like most of the things that we've covered, they have been from this. I remember starting from things like value types, reference types in the first sessions. Most of these things we've talked about. Um, collections. So we are like almost halfway the documentation, and something that we've not talked about is like interfaces and generics. So because that's something that can come after collections, because there's some related content with that you'll find on collections and arrays. Probably next week's session will be on generics and interfaces. So most of these recordings are available for you if you face a challenge with it. And Kaylee, you are communicating. I can't hear. Who is Kelly? I can't hear you. Kelly, you just also muted, but you can also communicate through the chat. All right. So I've shared the link to whatever you're learning today, and also you're going to touch something on arrays. So let me start on the collections. So when you talk about collections, you are talking about grouping similar data together into like grouping similar data. Like for instance, if you've dealt with other programming languages, you've heard about uh, arrays. Arrays can have, like for example, if you're doing C programming, you can't like combine two different data types. For instance, you cannot have a string and integer all together. JavaScript, yes, you can do so. Talking about C#, it's a strongly typed programming language. So we've learned about the type safety that you have to include. We've talked about if you're initializing a variable, you had to give it if it's a string. If it is an integer, you literally had to say that. So also this applies whenever you are talking about a collection. So for instance, now for a collection like a generic collection, we have collections like memory, we have the collections like span. So I know these things can seem like it's something difficult to understand. We see, so we have the arrays. So arrays can hold data from they can hold data just the same way like a span. However, a span cannot reduplicate something. Let's say, for instance, when you're dealing with arrays, at most cases, you will find that you can create an array and then you can also create the same kind of an array, but copying data into it. But a span will always take a snapshot or takes an image of the previous one, and then you can start manipulating. So most cases, you use the span collection in your applications, like the web applications, when you don't want your memory losses, because an array, whenever you want to modify some data, you literally have to make a copy of it. Like now you have to recreate the same thing, copying one array to another array that you're creating and then modify that array. But a span is something that C# has modified, and we shall be looking how we can be able to create this. We also have the memory, and most of these things, they're having concepts of uh, generics, but we are going to get to know like what it means. So there's this another special type of collection. You always find it when you're creating your APIs. It's known as a collection.generic.I enumerable. So when you find something like this, for instance, when you're dealing with an API is whereby you can be able to access certain data and be able to display them in maybe to your users. Like for instance, you want to get a number of users in your application. So because they can be stored in a format like an array or a collection, but you want to display all of them, so you have to enumerate them. Enumerating is like you have to loop through each and every item that you have. And these collections, you can be able to access their data or access them through their indexes. For instance, if you're working with an array, you can be able to access them through their index. Like literally all of this, you can access them through their index. So we have performance and profile. Like for instance, when you're working with this type of a collection known as a span, it's always very it always performs very well with your data. We also have growing and shrinking your application growing and shrinking dynamically. So for instance, there are two things to note. An array cannot increase. Okay, an array cannot increase in length, not unless you have to restart another one. But there's another type known as a list. A list will always grow without any limit. So we're going also to look at how is a list different from an array. However, all of them can seem similar, but they have some differences, or there's some differences between them. Okay, here they're talking about indexable collections. So these are collections that you can be able to access them through their specific index, like for instance, a list. So this is how you can be able to write a list. Like for instance, you start with a list, you give it a type. So this was like the T type that you are looking at. So you're saying that this list is going to hold data of type string, and you can give like this is just a variable that now, but this variable is a list type, but now this is the list data that you're having. So if you want to now look through them, that's what we were saying here, IEnumerable. So you'll come also to realize like what does this mean, especially when you're talking about getting to get different data. Like for instance, we have Chinook, Hoho, and then Pink, and then I think these are food that or from the sea, right? So you have to like now enumerate like each and every one. You want to get the first item, go to the second, third, and fourth. And in your naming, literally when you're doing a computer science related course, you found that this is always index 0, index 1, 2. So as you grow in your list and arrays. So how can you be able to do this? Last week we talked about the for each loop, or how does it work? So you are iterating through a list. First of all, you have to initialize by giving the for each. The keyword var. We talk also about var. Whenever you are not sure about something, or if you want C# to just infer your types, you can use var. However, you could just say a string of salmon. But however, C# developers, and I think this came in C# 12, whereby now you could now start using var, and var is not same as var in JavaScript. Var is just telling that C#, I would wish you to help me identify the value, or like what collection is available here. But C# will be very intelligent because you had started by initializing that this will become a string. But however, you can never, it's kind of very difficult for you to just say a list of var and then continue. It's a good practice. Just let C# compiler like know what type of data are you going to deal with. So in this case, if you want to iterate through it, we talked about how to iterate using a for each loop. So var salmon in salmons. So the salmons is whatever we had given earlier, but now a salmon will be now each and every index of this list. So we'll be doing all this and doing these operations. So as we get along, you see this a list of integers, and also we shall touch on it. Okay, we have the key pair collections. This now is more advanced. This is a dictionary. A dictionary will always hold data, especially if you want to now hold something like an object, something that has a key and has a value, like a JSON file. It always has keys and values. So for instance, in this example over here, these are just elements in a periodic table, and we have like different data. So for instance, you might want that whenever somebody accesses K, they can be able to find all these objects, like these are potassium. If they find CA, that's a calcium, and they'll be able to get all this. So while you're on Microsoft Learn, most of these things are very practical. You just have to be having to understand like each and everything that it does, have it on your Visual Studio Code while trying out. So we are going to try that, and iteration also we are going to do it. So if so LINQ and collections. So I don't know if today we are going to talk about LINQ. LINQ is a language integrated query. It's kind of writing of SQL statement, but in a C# context. Like for instance, if you have a list, for instance, of elements that you have, but you want to query, so you will be writing queries in C#. So when you write queries in C#, that is known as a LINQ. That's a language integrated query. So you have like to give all those elements. You can see like from the element in elements, that was the elements that you were talking about. And then you are trying to access those numbers if the atomic number of that is less than 22. So if you never understood chemistry, don't let this not bother you, because they just use an example using a periodic table. So you see they are ordering by elements.name and then selecting the entire document. And then they can be able to now print them using the for each loop. So this LINQ can be a separate session that we shall have, because we want to learn how to write a LINQ query from the fundamentals, like deriving it from the lower perspective, not to an advanced way, because this is an advanced way of using LINQ. But be sure that as a C# developer, you always be writing LINQs. Yeah. So we'll also talk about arrays. So we'll always talk about an array. So when declaring an array, you'll always start with a type, and then have these two angle brackets, and then just give the name. That is the array name. And in this case, they've just given you an example. If you want to declare a single array, like a single item, but you want it to be in a format of an array, but not a number. See, in this case, you have the int, and int is a type. You have to place these two angle brackets, and then array1 is the variable naming. So you could now say that's a new integer. So this is how you could declare a one-dimensional array or a single dimension array. But if you have sets, because this now is very common, the second one over here. So if you have this kind of set of values that you want to represent, like you have, let's say, numbers, for instance, 1, 2 to 6, as we are given below, you still do the same, give the name and giving those values. So we shall also try and do this when we do the demo of it. So we have other kind of arrays, like multi-dimensional arrays. So this is when you have arrays that should be placed in a row, column manner. So if you have that, let's say it's a two-dimensional array, then you have to give a comma separation within the angle brackets. This means that this means a row and a column. So this is like expecting two. If you have, let's say 4, you'll have 3 commas to separate that. Also, we'll talk about the jagged array. So this is when you want to have an array, but you're not specifically saying what kind of an array, like what values will it have. Like for instance, this jagged array has 2 arrays, like it's an array of arrays. So the first array is at index 0, this second array is at index 1. So we shall talk about how now can be able to insert data into the first array, in the second array, and all that. So I think at this point will allow me to open my Visual Studio Code, and then we try out these demos. Yeah, and that will be it for today. Let me just open my VS Code. So in this case, I'm going to create another folder. Let me just create it on my desktop. So once it's open, I'm just going to open it with Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to say open with code. So always be trying these things out, especially if you want to continue learning the next sessions, because we are just remaining with some few sessions before we now get into developing APIs with ASP.NET. So the ASP.NET will require you that you have the solid fundamentals of C#, and you'll be on the safe side, especially C# is not the ASP.NET will not be a challenge to you if you are understanding the knowledge on C#. All right. So for this, I'm going to create a solution. So for this, I can just start with control. So whenever you're starting something, you just say Control-Shift-P. You will open this command palette. So I know people are having challenges like which editor should they choose when writing C#, and I would always prefer using Visual Studio Code, because everything that you had to do with Visual Studio, the heavy editor, has been brought to you now to Visual Studio Code. It's not heavy for you, and you can be able to run everything. So for you to run it, for anybody who is in today and is new, just get into extensions over here. Then just look for the C# dev kit extension. So I always emphasize this each and every time we're starting a session, because we might be having somebody who is new and they will go try out these codes, and then they might not work on your side. Okay, why is it taking so long to search? Check on my internet speed. Or am I lost in the meeting? These are just installed extensions. So they're here. Let me just look for one that has been installed. It's this IntelliCode. So we have the C# extension. It's here. So the only thing that you have to install to be able to write C# on a Visual Studio Code is the C# dev kit. Once you have this, it always gives you the IntelliSense. IntelliSense is like prediction of like what's next to do. Another thing, you have to have the .NET SDK so that you can be able to run it. So just in your browser, go for .NET SDK and download SDK of version 8 or version 9. So we shall be talking about version 9, what it comes with, because soon we shall be hosting the .NET Conf, and it will be good for you to know that, or to have an idea of what version 9 does. So to create a new project in C#, we always create something known as a solution explorer. But to do that, you first create a project. So Control-Shift-V. It will always open this command palette. So for this type .NET or .NET project, you see these are my searches, because I always write several codes. But for you, this might not be the case. .NET new project. So it's going to load some palette of commands of what to choose. Just give it some time. Yeah, it's here. So now you have to now go through whatever you want to do. You see, you can do several things. You can see the once on the top, the .NET Aspire, something that you could also check. This supports native, cloud native. It has support of cloud native. We have several things, but we are interested about the console apps, which is here. Console apps are used for literally C# code that that you don't have to use different frameworks. So you want just something that's empty for you, but you can just proceed on top of that. So just choose that, give the name for it. So I'll call it collections. So this is collections. Then I wanted the defaults in my directory, and then create the project. So let's wait for that. So it has created, and just below it, there's this new solution explorer that has been created. So I'm just going to minimize the other one and then open the Solution Explorer. We have two explorers. So this is the default explorer, but to write C# and be able to manage several things, you have to use the Solution Explorer. So I just received a message from Molso. You won't be able to make it because yes, so he has just made that challenge on signing up into Teams. So let's just proceed. So once you create a project, you always find this. So if I click on collections, because this is the project itself, it tell you some information about it, about the SDK that you're using. But now we are more interested in this program.cs. C# files end to this .cs at the end. So the first program to always get is a console.writeline hello world. So if you are coming from a language that you literally had to write everything from start, let's say for you to print a console line, you had to write several code. C# is there for you. So if you want to run this code, let me check the place that I am in. So I have to get into collections. So cd to collections. So I'm in. So to run an application, just write .NET run. There's somebody whose mic is on. Let me check. Okay, somebody asking sending recording. So I'll send you the link to the whole playlist of all the sessions that we've been able to cover from the ones that we started when we introduced C#.NET to what we have at this point. So at the moment, I think this will be the 5th or the 4th session. So there are like all the recording available on YouTube, and all of them, they cover like literally everything that's available on the documentation. Okay, somebody asking they wants my terminal that looks like mine, but then mine is not either a different terminal. Just Git bash, but on my terminal. So for instance, if you on your machine, you have to have Git bash installed. So that means literally you have to have Git. So I'm sure that we are all, most of us, we are developers. Just get into your browser, then go for Git for Windows. So you download this first one. Once you download it and install, you'll be having Git bash available over here. So this Git bash, you can see even if I open it by default, it's a cool it's a cool terminal that you can use. And whichever you choose when using Visual Studio Code, you have to choose. So for instance, if I go to my VS Code over here, I have to choose what terminal to use. So how to open a terminal for somebody who's new, you can just use this 3 dots terminal, new terminal, or control tilde. So control tilde, you can just open and closing it. So that's a shortcut for it. So how to choose that? Sometimes now I don't want to use bash. You just have to select another. So you can say I can go for PowerShell. And over here I can go for command prompt. So anyone that you choose, but I always prefer to go with this because it has support for Linux operations like the CD, cutting. So whichever you choose is your preference. So let me clear. And then I want to run this code, just write .NET run. There are several ways. I'll just also demonstrate. I think I've never demonstrated how to run different lines of code. So this is how you could do that if you're using a terminal. If you want to use debugging, you can just F5, the function 5. Once you do that, you see you have to select the debugger, should be the C#. Tell me no C# is currently loaded. Okay, what's the problem with this? Let me just go the long way, run and debug from C#. Okay, I think I have my problem with my dev kit.